Afternoon all. Let's have a look at a brilliant game played in 1970. This was in the USSR versus rest of the world match of 1970, where Nd4 was representing the rest of the world team, and he was playing on board 1. Fischer was actually board 2. Nd4 had to play Boris Spassky. He kicked off the game with B3, which is one of his specialities. In fact, the system is often known as the Nimzo-Larsen attack after Nd4. So Spassky played E5, just classically occupying the centre. After bishop B2, we see knight C6. And here, a lot of players would usually play perhaps E3 and then maybe consider bishop B5 and knight F3 to put more pressure on E5. In this game, Larsen plays C4, which keeps an eye over D5, knight F6. Then we see the slightly provocative move, knight F3, provoking that pawn forward, and it does go forward. And then we see knight D4, bishop C5, attacking the knight. And here it looks as though white should have an option perhaps of E3 if needed. We'll check that out in the second pass of this game. In this game, Nd4 maybe broke the rule of to take as a mistake. He took on C6, which kind of helps Black's game rather than keeping the tension with E3. If you look at this position and the position with knight C6, it seems, well, after knight C6, intuitively, after D takes C6, okay, Black has got double pawns, but that D file could be useful. This E pawn is a bit of an annoyance, eyeing these squares, cramping White's game, unless it's a potential target later. Potentially though, Black can also try and castle queenside if needed to intensify pressure on what is now a backward pawn on D2. So it looks as though Black, in many respects, now has a comfortable game, and knight C6 basically is like help developed that bishop, giving it scope, giving it places to go. Okay, and we see now E3, and the bishop is used now with that newfound scope for bishop F5, just supporting the E4 pawn. Okay, and now queen C2, which doesn't really threaten to win a pawn or anything with bishop F6. The pawn is adequately supported. But White might be ambitiously trying to play something like knight C3, bishop E2, and then later maybe castle queenside and G4. Boris played queen E7, which gives the idea that maybe, if knight C3 and castles queenside, there might be bishop A3 later to take out this bishop. Larsen plays now bishop E2, so he doesn't seem too keen with the concept of castling queenside here, so he's keeping options open. Black now castles queenside, and the king looks quite safe on C8, and things are working well together. These bishops seem quite aggressive. This E4 pawn seems more of a strength than a liability. It's marking out D3, it's preventing D4 because of the en passant. So it's giving Black a significant cramping space advantage, it would seem. However, there is a pin here against that bishop, which is used now because it would be check. So this next move, F4, uses that pin. So if takes, then there's queen takes F5 is check. Okay, now with F4, positionally, it seems that this looks like a nice dark square control reinforced by the pawn on F4. So in some ways thematic for this system. We see now a very aggressive and kind of impudent knight move now from Boris, knight G4. G pawn is of no interest to Black here. It would just give Black play. I don't think White can afford to take that. There might be an immediate refutation. We'll check in the second pass. But knight G4 looks as though E3 is literally being targeted for something like bishop takes E3 or knight takes E3. This looks like a sensitive area because the king is still in the center, and it also looks like if castles, this looks really, really dangerous because of Queen h4, with difficulty to get rid of this knight, unless white wants to give up the bishop. That, I guess that would be possible, and then maybe even taking there. But it looks dangerous to castle. We really need to examine castling here. In principle it looks dangerous, because black already has this spatial cramp and this d-file grip. So is it actually possible to castle? Instead, Larsen played another pawn move which doesn't help white's development. These pieces are still at bay. The rooks are still not talking to each other. If you look at black's position, the rooks are talking to each other. Bishops are out. The knight looks aggressive. And okay, white really wants to push back these pieces safely. And in this position, okay, well, black played actually h5, which it gives the impression that an h3 the knight will just retreat, and then the idea is just to stop g4 from white, because white still might want to castle queenside and still might want to play for g4 and generally the diagonal and pressure on g7 generally, as well as a dark square strategy. However, the king is in the center, and that's a very, very concrete factor here in the situation to factor in. In fact, so concrete that after h3, this is an absolutely stunning move now that Boris plays. If you haven't seen this game before, where have you been living? On a rock? You must have seen this game before. I hope that 95% of you or more watching this video have seen this game before. I'm pretty shocked that I couldn't find where I've done it before, and I was looking at my Spassky playlist and I thought, where is this game? Why haven't I done this game? So, and it's this next move which makes this game kind of immortal status. So I wonder if you can guess it. You might want to pause the video and or spend the next 10 seconds trying to guess what black played in this position. So starting from now. Okay, black didn't retreat the knight, carrying on impotently with h4. And what is this? Well, the thing is, the rooks are connected, which means this is quite exciting for trying to kind of get on this h-file for the attack against white's king. So what are white's options here? Obviously he can take the knight. What else can he do if he doesn't? He can take the knight with also maybe the bishop, you might think, is an option. Okay, but he takes actually with the pawn. We'll examine bishop g4 as well in the second pass. He takes with the pawn. So what's the idea here? Now there's another piece attacks. Black just given away a knight. So what would you play here if I give you 10 seconds starting from now? Okay. Now subtract thousands of points if you retreat the bishop. No, the idea is to sack another piece, well, potentially, with h takes g3. So immediately attacking the rook. Of course the bishop can't be taken at the moment, the rook's not on. So something has to be done about the rook. Either take or move it away. The decision to move it away is taken. Rook g1. Okay, in this position we see why Spassky is an attacking genius, an absolutely imaginative attacking genius, and why he was able to eventually overcome Tigran Petrosian to become one of the great chess world champions. This next move is also a complete and utter stunner, which as you get more experience in chess, you check out sometimes more and more amazing resources. Well, it depends what style of play you have, but creative, dynamic players will search out weird and wonderful resources in positions, and this really is of that category. if I give you 10 seconds here, can you spot what Boris Spassky plays here, starting from now? Okay, he plays Rook H1. It's a drag and drop type tactic. In computer terms, you know, drag and drop. It's like dragging this Rook to H1. Why on earth would you want to do that at the cost of a Rook? Quite an expensive drag and drop for moving the Rook to H1. But White's choices, doesn't seem as though White has too many choices. Maybe he can consider protecting the Rook, you might think. But then what about Queen H4? So he just takes the Rook, and we see now this next move, G2, which is quite dangerous because the Rook has to stop the pawn queening, so it has to get in front of the pawn, surely, because otherwise that's going to be queening, you know, it's going to be check, it's going to be nasty. So EventDate, in this position though, he doesn't play the obvious Rook G1. He suspects something is really badly wrong here. We'll check out Rook G1 in the second pass. He plays actually Rook F1, offering the Rook back, not being too greedy, just wants to get back control of the position. Okay, but Black is not keen to immediately take on F1. Boris plays Queen H4 check. Okay, the king is forced to move basically. If Rook F2, then G1, queening again. So King D1. And now Black takes on F1, and here White actually resigns. He just realizes he's in a terrible state. This is a terrible state of affairs. I think it's to do with Bishop E3 really, or other stuff, Queen H1 or Queen F2. There's a variety of moves which are probably all crushing in this position. So let's check with an engine this game at second pass, various defences. But here is how the game ended. So it was a bit of an embarrassing defeat, especially as, you know, Fischer was forced to play on board 2, and EventDate, who was one of the strongest players in the Western world, he's just been absolutely smashed by Boris Spassky here. Smashed by Spassky. So let's check this position, this final position, to make sure what is actually the key thing. The key thing apparently is to mate in 3 actually. So Bishop takes F1. Bishop takes G4, check, and we see now White's a mate in 3, because if King C1, then Queen E1 check is really annoying, so that we mate. Okay, and if Bishop E2, then Queen H1 is a bit embarrassing, that's a mate in 1. Okay, so this is quite a bad state of affairs after Bishop takes G4, and that's probably why White resigned. But let's go back and see, really, did this really demonstrate to take as a mistake, as a major blunder by White? Did he have a reasonable position? Is C4 already bad? The usual move, I believe, is E3 in hypermodern style to put pressure on C6 to try and undermine E5. I think E3 is commonly played. But C4, okay, let's go with it. It seems, from an engine point of view, Black's already equalised. After knight F6, knight F3, this is hypermodern provocation. But the engine just believes Black's almost half a pawn advantage after E4. It is gaining space, but on the other hand, hold on a sec, knight D4, was this so bad? Could the knight have just been supported after Bishop C5? We do get a demonstration of to take as a mistake, because it did seem to, you know, help Black's development, help the Bishop just come to F5 naturally, help the use of the D file, clamp. That pawn was a real clamp on the D pawn. And coincidentally, I keep, you know, ending up playing Nakamura on the ICC with this kind of terrible idea as well for some reason. I'm attracted to playing B3, and I get smashed usually on the D file in similar vein to this game. I don't know, something about this system here. But if Black's got that D file control, that's quite a sizable asset. If we go for E3 or knight C2, what is wrong with E3? Can Black actually force an advantage with Bishop takes D4? Is that really the case? D5? It looks bad with the double pawns and the Bishop kind of hemmed in. So C5, knight G4 again. Is that really dangerous in this position? Bishop E2, trying to evict the knight, Queen H4. This looks dangerous, this position, but is it better than the game? Well, I think a lot of things are probably better than the game. In this position, white is still surviving, not yet mated, but knight c3 is not available. You know, black's got good piece pressure on the centre. Black's actually doing very well here, so this doesn't look like an attractive continuation with e3. But another suggestion here from the engine is knight c2. So let's go with d6, knight c3. This looks more in the hypermodern style that actually black isn't given too much of a bind, and now the centre might be attacked a little bit later. Let's go with h5. Now e3, and it looks as though at least white should be okay, surely. Or is black actually getting some sort of nasty grip again on the position? Knight takes here isn't so bad, surely, as the game. And in fact, if white can castle, we're almost reaching equality, but that's not a good sign with white. So something bad maybe earlier about this just opening. It looks like you know, maybe knight f3 is not the best here. In fact, maybe it's overly provocative. Maybe knight c3. Okay, so we'll go with it now that maybe knight c2 and e3 are better moves. Knight f5 looks just outrageous to move a piece again. So probably knight c2. Okay, but on knight takes c6, it looks as though black's really won the opening stage of this game. Okay, d takes c, e3, because the double pawns, they don't seem to be of great exploitable significance. They're more of a visual weakness, visually weak. So bishop f5, you know, maybe in an endgame, is white going to survive to an endgame, you know? So queen c2, queen e7, keeping that bind on with that pawn, that spatial grip in the centre. Bishop e2, and we saw castling queenside just looks like such a gorgeous move to be able to castle with a rook active, rooks connected. It looks gorgeous. Now technically the interesting thing is the engine doesn't even like castling queenside. It seems such a neat move from a human perspective. The engine prefers rook d8, so there's something about this position. Maybe a3, is that a missed opportunity? a3 just to play b4, does that cast some doubt on the black setup? It looks as though if the bishop goes back to b6, it's destroyed with c5, end of game. So if it goes back to d6 here, this looks better than the game, keeping options open. Okay, and there's the c5 option. It looks better than the game actually, and the double pawns will be compressed with c5. It might not be that bad. Okay, so in the game we see f4, which might not be helping white's cause from a technical point of view. From a positional point of view, it seems, yeah, a good idea positioning. Increase the grip on the dark squares, and maybe, you know, g4, g5 is going to be even more effective later to make this a monster bishop on the diagonal. Now this knight g4 is kind of piece play, direct piece play, and threats are set up. You know, maybe like even bishop e3. If bishop g7, let's have a quick look at that. That seems far too materialistic for the position. Let's put the bishop back here. Check. Now here, this is very interesting stuff, which the engine is checking out here. Knight takes e3 justifies the knight g4, leaving the queen hanging. If d takes here, d takes, rook takes g3, and it's very, very dangerous for white. White's probably getting smashed because he can't really use his pieces yet, the rook and knight. If we look at this position, this looks as though black's got all the pieces out ready to attack, and it looks pretty nasty. Very nasty. With queen g3 there, it looks as though, okay, white's going to be dropping pieces. It looks like a nightmare. But that's interesting that knight g4 has got these powerful kind of implications in this position. But bishop g7 clearly is a move asking for it. So let's not concern ourselves too much with that greedy move. So g3, and we see h5, and I don't know if if Houdini will pick up this entire conception now, because this really is one of the most like magical games I think that Spassky's played. Would an engine really pick up h4 as a move? It seems, you know, creative genius. The engine is actually liking knight takes e3, which does justify the knight on g4, and it's probably very dangerous in its own right. Maybe Petrosian was banking on something like this to provoke this piece sack. If he did provoke this piece sack, is it that clear? Knight for 2 pawns, queen c3, bishop d4, queen c1, e3. It still looks as though this is a grim proposition, to be honest. Very grim, because, you know, how does white actually develop? If he plays knight c3, then rook d2 looks crushing. There's things like rook c2. If knight c3 is not possible, then what is white actually doing here to develop in this position? This pawn is just looking really nasty. So this position looks pretty bad as well, if nothing else, with this knight sack. But the move played in the game, I don't know if the engine will really like it. We're at depth 15. h4 at depth 16, 17 is now played. This is phenomenal. It shows the attacking strength of Boris Spassky, that he's able to play Houdini type moves at depth 17 or more back in 1970. So this is probably why he's one of the most dangerous attacking players that ever came out of the USSR, the ex-USSR. He's found h4. It's just an incredibly powerful and interesting resource to be able to play, not just to win the game, but to create an immortal game. Maybe that's another goal, you know, for the enthusiastic chess player. This really does create almost, it's an immortal game. But what is going on here? Hg was played. If bishop takes g4, okay, let's go with bishop takes g4, h takes g4, and we still get the same pattern, hg3. But is the engine actually factoring in this idea of rook h1 here? It's looking actually at rook h2 being strong in this position, not rook h1, which is very, very interesting. So will this idea require greater depth than depth 17 for rook h1? Does it actually work here in this particular position? Is this the same position as before? It's slightly different, but rook h2 is given as very strong, which does restrict the knight. If we just have a quick look at rook h2, you know, if the knight moves, then rook d takes d2, and this can't be too hot, can it? Check. Taking on e3, even though 2 rooks for the queen, the coordination issue is probably too much here, you know, as this demonstrates. So, but in this position, does actually, for those interested, does actually rook h1 work here? Take g2, rook g1, and looks as though black's better here as well after check. This position is quite crushing as well. If we go back to this position now, does the engine actually like rook h1 as well? It's just that there seems to be even stronger moves available. Rook h2, queen h4. If I actually increase the lines, rook h1 is there as the third choice. You can't quite see it, but it's there as the third choice. But these other two are looking stronger at this depth. But aesthetically, you know, the impact, visual impact of rook h1 is phenomenal. So it is actually one of, it's in the top 3. It's the third choice in this position. But let's go back to the game. So we've got a similar pattern there to the game continuation. But in the game continuation, okay, hg. In the game continuation, white's still with the bishop on e2, and it still works, this combination. So rook g1, and it seems rook h1 is still powerful. I doubt at all that rook takes is to take it as a mistake again. It's developing black and coming quicker. You know, I don't think there's any real escape here. This would be a mate in 5. That would be complete disaster. Just giving black that h rook develops automatically. So white is in a bad state here. And again, the engine doesn't immediately factor in rook h1, but rather other moves. Bishop e3, queen h4. If we just check peak g2 is mentioned. Now rook h1 is coming up the scale actually at this depth. It's now actually a rank 2 candidate at depth 15. Rook H1, it's an absolute crusher. It really, these drag and drop tactics really strike for me at the center of some really advanced tactical attacking ideas. The drag and drop tactic, Rook H1, I think the engine should say in the future this is a drag and drop tactic. This is it would be nice to identify the type of tactics used in the variations here. But it is dragging and dropping that rook from G1 to H1. What else is there? King F1, Queen H4. We've got things like Queen H3 happening. Okay, let's demonstrate. Well, say Knight C3, Queen H3, then just taking the rook. It's just no defense. It's just helpless for white, this position. D3 doesn't really help. G2 takes. Queen H2 mate. That pawn is also helping in the mating there. It's just an absolutely terrible position where really black was developed, you know, from Knight C6 and just exploiting the connected rooks against white's unconnected rooks. You know, these poor spectator pieces here never got out of the box. So G2, what else is there? So Rook F1 was playing. If Rook G1, I guess the problem is this check. Okay, now in this position, which didn't happen because, you know, Rook F1 had been chosen, but in this position, is Queen F2 or Queen H1 needed? Is Queen H1 actually needed? If Queen F2, does white defend? Possibly, yes. With Rook takes G2 apparently. Queen takes, Queen C3, giving the King C2. Bishop takes. White might survive this actually. This is a survival variation. But in this line, which wasn't played because after G2 there was Rook F1. But if Rook G1, Queen check, King D1, the cruncher is either Queen H1 or Queen H2. Queen H1 the absolute cruncher. So the rook cannot be helped by any of other white's pieces here. Off, that's it. That's clearly it. And this queen is queening as well. This pawn is queening again. So doesn't matter where the rook seems, you know, to go. It went to F1, offering F, but now just check and just taking, and that was it because of the bishop G4. So it's probably one of Brillianc's worst ever defeats with white with the B3 system, and probably after this game the usage of 1b3 I guess declined considerably. It was such a shocking devastating game for its one of its major exponents of 1b3 that I believe if you check the usage of the opening set chessgames.com for how much this system was used, it went down after, but it still remains a surprise weapon, 1b3, the Nimzo-Larsen attack system, but not played like this nowadays. So usually I think it's just played not with free c4 but with e3 I believe. And there's interesting ideas, you know, in this line, like knight a3 here for knight c4 if the bishop tries to protect. That looks like an artificial move but more justified against this setup if white's going to play for this doubling of pawns. But there's this move knight a3 which is also very interesting if you ever want to play this system. But okay, this was one of the most aesthetically pleasing wins that I think, you know, Boris had in his career, and I hope you enjoyed it. So in the game continuation it ended here, so with a possible continuation, for example like this. Ouch. Comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.